Hey everybody, how are you doing? I hope everything's going well. It's time to revise, and you can do it here with me today. We're going to work on the multi-store model of memory for AQA A-level Psych Paper 1. So, let's crack on.
Right, here's your chance to do something active to start with. So you press pause at this point and have a go at blurting the multi-store model of memory. All you need is a bit of blank paper, a pen, and then preferably something to check what you've done. That might be the textbook, your notes. I'll have a quick chat through, but I'm not going to review the whole content right now. So anyway, press pause, give it a go, come back when you're ready. There you go. So your first round of blurting might look something like that. So you might have remembered that there are the three stores, your sensory register, your STM, your LTM. You might remember some of the processes that happen to kind of transfer the information between the stores. You might remember some of the properties, the encoding, the capacity, the duration, that sort of stuff. You might have remembered some of the evaluation points. You might have studied people like Clive Wearing or HM. You might have remembered that you could compare it to the working model. You might remember that a lot of the evidence done in this area is kind of artificial lab-based stuff. So there's a few bits there that gives a pretty good overview. And then you might have got your notes or whatever and added a few bits in. And you might think, oh yeah, actually, I forgot that bit. I forgot the process of retrieval. Maybe I forgot about forgetting, decay, displacement, that sort of stuff. Maybe there's some more terminology. There's bits about brain scanning that you could use to support the idea that actually there are separate types of LTM. There's loads of stuff potentially that you could say here, but that's probably what your blurting is going to have looked like. Okay, so let's crack on now that we've done that. And now we're going to look at some exam style questions. So again, here's your opportunity. I do want people to try and be as active as possible in this. Here's your opportunity to pause the video and give it a go. You've got timings and marks and stuff there. Pick whatever you like, whatever you've got time for, even if you just plan some of the bigger ones, up to you. And then, yeah, when you're ready, when you've had a go, press play again and come back and we'll have a chat. Okay, so the first one there, you've got 3 marks and the command word is outlined. So this is just a knowledge question. And what we want to do here is we want to outline the properties of STM. So by properties, you should know that that refers to, and these are the bits that are named on the spec, the encoding, the capacity, and the duration. So it makes sense that that's probably 1 mark per thing there, doesn't it? So let's start with capacity. Capacity of STM, according to research, according to Miller, you might remember, is 7 plus or minus 2. So we can hold 5 to 9 items in our STM. Give yourself a mark for that. Where should we go next? Duration, so anywhere kind of between 18 to 30 seconds. You might remember the Peterson and Peterson study with the trigrams. That's your duration before it's going to be forgotten due to decay. And STM we know is encoded acoustically, so we pay attention to and remember the sound of information. Okay, that's that one. Hopefully you got 3 out of 3 on that. The next one is asking you to explain the role of rehearsal according to the MSM. So you hopefully remember that rehearsal is how we transfer information into the long-term memory from the short-term memory. So where we repeat information to ourselves, that's what is going to help us to remember it. But given that it's 2 marks and given that we probably know a little bit more than that, it would also be nice to mention the fact that maintenance rehearsal is what keeps it in the STM. Yeah, so that rehearsal loop, repeating it to yourself over and over again, that's what keeps it in the STM. And over time, that repetition should enable information to go into the LTM as well. Yeah? Okay, hopefully there's 2 out of 2 on that one. We've then got a 4 marker, outline the multi-store model, refer to the features. All right, so, I mean, this could easily be a 6 marker. So you might even like to, once you've been through it, have a think about what you would add to your response to make it a 6 marker. But we'll just have a chat generally about this one now. So I think it makes sense to kind of talk logically through the diagram here if you've got the diagram in front of you or you can visualize it. So initially information is in the environment, of course, so it might make sense to start with the idea that the multi-store model says that information is first acquired from the environment and goes into the sensory register. And you could mention some of the properties of that. You could say that the sensory register or sensory memory is modality specific or modality dependent. Sounds quite good, doesn't it? Basically just means that If a stimulus is visual, we kind of store it visually. If it's touch, if it's a feeling, we kind of store it there. If it's sound, it's stored in sound. It's stored in the form in which it occurred. You could talk about the fact that it's only going to last less than a second. Before we then move on and we say about the next stage. So the next part of memory, the next store, is the short-term memory, of course, and it's worth mentioning how information gets from the sensory register to the STM. So that's, of course, by directing attention to it. Once it's in the short-term memory, mention the features again here, so it can stay for up to maybe 30 seconds before it decays. We can hold 7 plus or minus 2 items, or 5 to 9 items, before we forget due to displacement. So displacement is where you run out of space. And information is stored acoustically here. Information can be retained using the rehearsal loop, according to the Multistore model of memory, and prolonged rehearsal, repeated rehearsal, can enable transfer of that information into the LTM, where it can stay potentially for a lifetime, so that's the duration there, and the LTM can potentially hold an infinite amount of information, so that's your capacity. The last part to mention there is that in the LTM, information is stored semantically, so we encode it according to the meaning of it. Now, that might feel like quite a lot of information, and there's a lot going on in that question. You've got 3 stores, and you need to comment on the features of each store. Believe it or not, there is more you could say if it was a 6 marker. So you could talk about, for example, the fact that it takes an information processing approach. It's a form of computer model of behavior or of thinking. You could say that information flows sequentially or in a linear fashion, kind of from one end of the diagram to the other. And you could elaborate a bit more on those types of forgetting that I mentioned if you wanted to. But hopefully that seems okay compared to what you wrote. Okay, let's have a look at the next one. So the following is an extract from an article. We've got 2 revision techniques here: copying notes out over and over again and using quizzing platforms. And we are asked for 4 marks to explain why these techniques might be helpful according to the Multistore model. The first thing to say is I am not a fan of copying notes out over and over again. And we know that the Multistore model is limited. We know that copying notes out over and over again isn't actually that helpful for long-term learning. But let's go with it for the sake of the question. So copying notes out over and over again is your rehearsal, isn't it? So that's where you're going to talk about your rehearsal loop, your maintenance rehearsal, and that repetition, meaning that the information that you're copying out, so your notes, is going to be passed into the LTM. So that's fine, I think. I'm sure you got that. The online quizzing, you could go down a similar route, or what jumps out to me potentially is that if you're quizzing, maybe you're actually having to define concepts, you're having to think about the meaning of them. And there, I'd probably make a link to the fact that LTM is encoded semantically. So I think that would be a nice way to approach that question. The first one about repetition, rehearsal is the word I'm looking for, rehearsal. And the second one being about maybe semantic, the meaning stuff for LTM. Okay? Right, we've now got an evaluation question. We've got explain a strength and a limitation for 6 marks. No prizes for breaking it down into 3 plus 3. That would make sense. So we're going to use maybe a peel kind of structure for this to try and get those 3 marks. And it depends what you know, doesn't it? But what could a strength be? Maybe you could talk about research support as your kind of point. Your evidence could be something like the Peterson's trigram study on duration. You could use Miller's digit span studies. You could talk about what else? You might have learned the Glanzer and Kunitz study that was done with the serial position curve. So showing that information kind of passes into the LTM. If you read out a whole list of numbers or words, the first ones go into the LTM and the more recent ones stay in the STM, and you get this kind of gap in the middle of the list where people forget because they haven't quite gone into the LTM and they're not in the STM anymore. It's called the primacy and recency effect. I'm sure some of you will have studied that and been aware of that. But anyway, whichever research you use, you could build a paragraph out of being in terms of being a strength of the model there, backed by research. You could say that gives it credibility or validity or something there. A limitation could be loads of different stuff. So you could use research that doesn't support it. You could talk about maybe how the different types of LTM, and maybe link to brain scanning studies to show that different types of LTM occur in different regions of the brain. You could do that, and you could say that that casts doubt on the unitary nature of the long-term memory according to the Multistore model. Yeah, so basically arguing that they should be separate parts. You could do a similar thing by comparing it to the working model. The working model, remember, kind of breaks down the unitary part of STM into different slave stores. So you could, go down that route if you like, and again question the credibility of the Multistore model. You could, if you're a bit further along in the course, if you're looking back at this, at year 13 and you've done some issues and debates, maybe you could talk about the fact that it's machine reductionist. So it models thinking, basically, it says the brain is like a computer with these different stores and information just kind of flows between them. The brain doesn't really work like that. We don't really work like that. It's an oversimplification, isn't it? We've got things like emotion and all sorts of other stuff going on. So you could do that as a limitation if you like. Okay, that brings us nicely to the 16 marker, and I've been through a lot of these points already, so just very quickly, you're going to break it down in terms of the command word is discussed. So we know that for a 16 marker there are going to be 6 marks of knowledge and 10 marks of evaluation and discussion, because there's no stem, no scenario or anything with that one. So it is fairly straightforward to structure. For that 6 marks, I've kind of been through that already. If you've skipped through, maybe skip back and listen again to my answer or my discussion of question 3, the 4 marker. For the 10 evaluation marks, again, I've been through a few points already, but I would suggest you have 3 or 4 points that you're going to explain an appeal type structure. If you're going to go for 3, I would really encourage some further discussion, maybe some counter arguments, some implications, that kind of stuff, to push your response up to level 4. So quick recap again of evaluation points here. You could talk about research to support it. So you could use like research into the features, duration, capacity, that kind of stuff. You could use research against it. So I guess that could be a 2-sided paragraph there if you like. So you could use case study evidence like KF, the difference between visual and verbal memory, suggesting that STM isn't unitary. You could use research into LTM types there, again, to question the unitary nature of LTM. You could talk again, I said this a minute ago, about machine reductionism being a problem. You could do a little comparison paragraph with the working model and say that's better. Maybe you're going to say it's got greater explanatory power than the Multistore model because it can explain more stuff. What else? I'm sure there are other things that you could talk about, other things that you've studied. In our blurting, we mentioned the fact that a lot of the evidence for the Multistore model comes from artificial lab studies. So you could question the extent to which the Multistore model could really be used to understand how memory works in real life. That could be a paragraph. If you're going to do something like that, just make sure you're not making it generic. You're not just finishing saying, therefore the studies lack ecological validity. You're actually linking it back to the theory that we're trying to evaluate, yeah? Otherwise, the examiner isn't really going to give you credit for that point. All right, so loads of ideas there. Okay, so the last part of this, and you'll have naturally done some of this as we've been through the discussion of those questions, but do take a minute. It is important to reflect on how that's gone and think about how your activity today is going to kind of feed back into the revision that you're going to do next, okay? All right, well, that was me covering the Multistore model for part of our revision. I hope that was really useful for you. Please, feel free to ask questions in the comment section. It'd be really nice if you'd consider liking and subscribing and all of that jazz. Links for other stuff is in the description if you're interested. So, yeah, thanks very much. Good luck with it all. Keep going. I'll see you in another video. Cheers.